Yoga of Self-Perfection. This is a part of a series of talks given at the Madhapur Sri Aurobindo Study Circle in Hyderabad in 2017. So we are on chapter 3 of the Yoga of Self-Perfection section. The name of this chapter is Psychology of Self-Perfection. In chapter 1, Sri Aurobindo gave a summary of different yogas and he gave a slight introduction to integral yoga. He said integral yoga follows the method of the Vedanta to arrive at the result of the Tantra. The method of the Vedanta, the idea being identify with the self, elevate one's consciousness to arrive at the self. The aim of the Tantra, meaning don't turn away from this world, be rooted in this world but in the divine consciousness. So, in one way, the raising up of the consciousness but also the receiving of the divine consciousness. That is the approach of the integral yoga. That is what he laid out. Then in the second chapter last week we discussed mundane perfection and religious conversion. How mundane perfection or social approach towards perfection tries to arrive at perfection of physical without going deeply into the soul of things, without going into the spirit or truth of things. Religious conversion, on the other hand, turned its back upon the world and said you arrive at the perfection of the spirit but ignore the world. So Sri Aurobindo pointed out how in the case of integral yoga, we talk about perfection with the awareness of the spirit. So we are not turning our back upon the world, we continue to exist in the world, but we exist there with the awareness that there is a higher consciousness that is waiting to descend. And the higher consciousness will come down and transform the physical, vital and the mental. So this is the background. And in each of these cases, Sri Aurobindo also points out that the approach of integral yoga does not stop with the individual, but it also then expands to the collective. So that is the broad flow we have seen so far. Essentially then, this divine perfection is a conversion of the human into the likeness of and fundamental oneness with the divine nature, a rapid shaping of the image of God in man. Human nature at present is the confused interminglings of the various principles. How to disengage from this knot of thinking mortal matter, the immortal that it contains, from this mentalized and vital animal man, is the real problem of a human being and human living. Essentially, our normal consciousness is an intermingling of our physical, vital and mental without an understanding of each of these as being different or understanding how each is impacting the other. We exist as an ego and the ego encompasses all of these elements. The idea is how do you arrive at an image of God in this kind of a confused state. Then he goes on to write about the approach of psychology. But he says that the ordinary psychology or scientific psychology with no basis in spiritual truths and only based in mind and its phenomena or biology alone cannot help it. We must arrive at and use a psychophysical knowledge with a spiritual foundation. In fact, as we come to the physiology of human body, in the last 100 to 150 years, there has been a tremendous amount of progress, enormous progress in understanding. But even that is not complete yet. In fact, as recently as I think a month ago, a new organ was discovered in the human body. I mean, we are talking of 21st century and we are still talking of physiological discoveries. But at least we are 90% there, 95% there, and now it's only an incremental addition. But this is in the gross material level. The minute we move to the subtler levels, the grasp of science loosens in a way. It is not as comprehensive, as deep. For example, if we take with dealing with emotions, we are still not very clear how to deal with them in a consistent basis, because finally the search of humanity is for happiness. So why can't we take one injection every morning and be happy for the rest of the day? We can all be happy, what is wrong? But somehow we haven't arrived there because our own understanding of this is not comprehensive. But even to go to something even more obvious, if we take the phenomenon of the brain, we understand the physiology of the brain, how much it weighs, what are its contours, where it is encased and all that. But the functioning of the brain and thought is not something we have been able to nail down. We understand 10%, 20%, 30%. This region of the brain deals with that. But really the linkage between thought and brain is not something we have understood or evolved in the modern science. It is an area. And the whole other area is dreams. We don't understand the relationship between the physiology and the dream world, or what is the reality of the dream world. So, the tradition of science is still in the process of discovery. Science hasn't discovered everything, because if science has discovered everything, there is no need for research. The whole purpose of research is to uncover what is unknown. Spirituality somewhat started from the other side, and it has tried to perfect the human being in the inner side in a large way. Yoga in particular, and that too, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga and all of these, they have tried to approach humanity, the human being, from the inner to outer point of view. And there, Sri Aurobindo says, trying to use psychology to understand human beings is a very incomplete process if you don't understand the spiritual foundation of the human being. We must arrive at and use a psychophysical knowledge with a spiritual foundation. Man is in his real nature a spirit using mind, life and body for an individual and communal experience and self-manifestation in the universe. Man is in his real nature a spirit using mind and life and body for an individual and communal experience and self-manifestation in the universe. Like we discussed last time, it is as if we have come to this particular realm of existence as a spirit. We have put on the material being that belongs to this realm of experience, and we are undergoing these experiences. At the end of this body or manifestation will collapse and the spirit will go somewhere else. It is almost, that is the perspective. The spirit is coming down with mind, body and prana as the basis. This is the fabric with which we are manifesting. And we have come here for what purpose? For an individual and communal experience. Unfortunately, we as human beings have some peculiarities. If you look at it from this point of view of the soul coming down, let us just examine our existence. The soul needs a body. So we have a body, and because we have a body, we are identified with the body, and we created a whole industry around the body. a whole major aspect of life around the body, whether it is the gyms, whether it is the beauty industry, whether it is the plastic surgery industry. The identification with the body is so complete, we created a whole life around the body without understanding the inner thing. Because we are born as a body, we need to have some food. We created a whole industry around food, and some of our entire life gets consumed in the food. Because we need money to be able to survive in a communal life, and therefore we have a career, now we made the career the whole thing. Now, people go into depression when they lose a job. Because their identity with the job is so complete. Particularly, you will see not one, but an extremely large percentage of people, men in particular, have an identity crisis at the time of their retirement. Because they are used to spending a few decades saying, I am so and so, here is my business card. I am so and so, here is my business card. I am so and so, here is my business card. And then you meet people who have retired, suddenly they find themselves at a loss. And because of that, they try to grab identities and try to identify with something that is respectable, prestigious. People go into depression because their body is a little fat. So we have identified ourselves with all these externalities, whereas the truth is all these are required because the soul needs a body. And we forgot the soul completely. So this can be extended in a variety of ways. But we are missing the truth for the manifestation, the outer manifestation. And somewhere along the way, if we have to have a meaningful spiritual experience in this life, we have to go back to the truth that we are first the spirit and then the body and then everything else. And none of them in itself has any significant use or meaning or identity except the true self in ourselves. Sri Aurobindo goes on to explain the spirit that he talks about, the spirit that is manifested in the mind, life and body. He says, what is the truth of the spirit? The truth of the spirit is an infinite existence limiting itself in apparent being for individual experience. Apparent being is you and me. So what is inside you and me? What is the real spirit? It is the infinite existence. It is the supreme existence. It is not limited to this body. It is a drop from that mighty ocean that is in this body. Infinite consciousness, which defines itself in finite forms of consciousness for joy of various knowledge and various power of being. So again, it is an awareness. We are aware only of our body, and we are aware, I can hear, I can taste, I can speak, I can listen. This I has only got limited to the body, whereas in its source, the I is infinite consciousness. Iska koi ant nahi hai. And then infinite delight of being, expanding and contracting itself and its powers, concealing and discovering, formulating many terms of its joy of existence. One of the central themes of why the spirit has taken the body, there is only one purpose, and that purpose is Ananda, delight. That is the only purpose. One will say the spirit has taken the mind, life and body. Why has it taken? To have experiences for the joy. So, in our essence, we have come here, our spirit has come here, our soul has manifested seeking joy. The joy of the soul is defined not as the joy of the body or the mind. The joy of the soul, the rasa, the essence of the aesthetic experience, it's called rasa. The rasa that we get for the soul is different from the joy of the body. I get joy when I eat a sweet. But the rasa of the soul, the experience of the soul, it can derive experiences even through difficulties. So Sri Aurobindo says, the essence of the spirit is infinite existence, sat, infinite consciousness, chit, infinite delight, ananda. The essence of experience is sat, chit and ananda. To discover the eternal Sachidananda, the essential self of our being within us, and live in it is the stable basis. This is the active principle of spiritual perfection. He ties it back to yoga of self-perfection. That is one of the things about Sri Aurobindo. He may tell you a long story and you think, okay, the story is nice, but then he will bring it back to the beginning. Why is it important? Again, what is the whole thing about this? He says it is because the essential self in us. We have to live in that stable basis of Sat, Chid and Ananda, and that is the active principle for self-perfection. We have to realize this. We have to make sure that we live in the Satchidananda. How will we live in the Satchidananda? There are very simple ways. First thing, don't let falsehood come out through your manasa, vacha, karma. ना झूठ मुंह से निकलना चाहिए, ना अपने कामों में रिफ्लेक्ट होना चाहिए. What we tell a 5-year-old kid, don't tell a lie, it has a very profound truth, that cultural element. It goes right up to the self-realization, because without that basis, everything else cannot be done. Sat is the first basis. Then Chit, being more aware, being more conscious in our work, in our thoughts, in our deeds. And then the delight. Try to look at things positively. Try to look at things with a little bit of detachment. Try to look at things with a faith and trust that the divine is always doing what is best for us. That is where the true delight can be derived from. We all have a story where, well, it's not a story, it's an actual happening, where when mother described all this integral yoga, this, that and all that, one young girl wrote to her, what can we do to help in this yoga? What can I do to help in this yoga? It is like Sri Krishna Govardhan उठाया तो कुछ गोले लकड़ी खड़ा किए थे उनके पास जाके, saying that we are also lifting up the mountain. So like that, what can I do to help? She said, be happy. That is all that we need to do. Have a trust and faith that everything is being taken care of. Now we are touching a topic which Sri Aurobindo refers to the core instruments of human existence. Being happy is the most difficult thing. Why? It is a journey. It is a journey of remembering ourselves, reminding ourselves. इसमें अभी जो हमने बात किया है, we are essentially a soul with a body. लेकिन हम क्या किया है, हम ये भूल गए हैं कि हम आत्मा हैं. हम बॉडी के चीज़ों के साथ आइडेंटिफाई कर लिया है. अभी आप जो पावर की बात कर रहे हैं, इट इज़ रिलेटेड टू द बॉडी. आई कैन कंट्रोल 1000 पीपल. जब तक हमारा जो हैप्पीनेस है ये बॉडी रिलेटेड चीज़ों पर निर्भर है, तब तक वो ऊपर नीचे होता रहेगा. क्योंकि अभी आप लुक एट द इंडस्ट्री पर्टिकुलरली रिलेटेड टू फिल्म्स में जो है ना, एक्टर बनना चाहता है, एक्ट्रेस बनना चाहती है, उनका सबसे बड़ा डर क्या होता है? लोग मुझे भूल जाएंगे. आपका सबसे बड़ा डर ये रहता है कि लोगों में जो मेरे लिए आदर है वो कहीं निकल जाएगा तो मैं क्या हो जाऊंगा, है ना. एक्टर्स का सबसे बड़ा डर यही रहता है. लेकिन इसमें क्या हो रहा है, आपका कंट्रोल लोगों पर उतना नहीं है जितना आप सोचते हैं. ये आप बाहर में आपका आनंद ढूंढ रहे हो और वो हमेशा टेम्पररी ही रहेगा. जब तक हम ये बॉडी के रिलेटेड चीज़ों से अपना आनंद को टाई करेंगे, तब तक हमारा लाइफ मिजरेबल ही रहेगा. और हमारी जो आत्मा की जर्नी है वो ऐसा है कि वो आपको खुश नहीं रहने देगा. इस धोखे में रहने नहीं देगा, क्योंकि वो सच ढूंढ रहा है और ये सच नहीं है, ये झूठ है. और जब तक आप झूठ के सहारे चल रहे हो, वो झूठ को आपको निकाल देगा आपके हाथ से. हाँ, फिर आपको अंदर ढूंढना पड़ेगा. क्यों? वाई इज इट दैट आई एम अनहैप्पी? एंड अगेन, so what Swati was also saying just now, it is a simple thing, but it is also the most difficult thing. See, अभी इन्होंने जो बोला ये बहुत what Anna said just now, कि we are happy, we have tasted that connection, that joy, and हमारे जो करीब फैमिली है, when they don't understand it and they don't taste it, that shadow falls on us. And the suffering of our family affects us more than the suffering of the outside people, because we are very close to them, decades of association. Hamare bacche, hamare parents, hamare bhai. It is so dear. The answer for this, in some way, is also again, it's an answer that all of us are exploring. Sometimes I feel that too is being brought to us for us to grow in our stature more, because eventually, if we are able to genuinely connect to that source and reflect or transmit what we are receiving from that source, even the family that comes in touch with us will naturally taste that. But that is a little while away. First, हमको ही taste करना चाहिए, and stably. Stable. See, one of the things that Sri Aurobindo says here, to discover the eternal Satchidananda, the essential self of being within us, and live in it in the stable basis. See, for example, we in this lifetime should arrive at a stage where we should just be able to say Aham Asmi, I exist, and be able to just sit here in a state of total silence for 2 hours, eyes open and just looking. Just imagine what it calls for. Because the truth of the matter is, that is the essential you. We are so lost in our extension of action, word, thought, that we have lost our true self. I am not saying that is the ultimate goal. What I am saying is, that is a capacity we need. And once that capacity is established, we can stretch out into the real world, because then you are giving that essence. But right now, forget about 2 hours. We can't even sit for 10 minutes as Aham Asmi without a thought, without a word, without... Mind is so restless, mind is so agitated. And like we were discussing last time, we are all Fevicol Purush. Anything we see, anything we touch, anybody we talk, we attach it to ourselves. And then our thoughts, we have to slowly... And another aspect is also keeping in mind that there is a larger framework of karma at work. Even if somebody is very, very dear to me, I cannot take away that person's mode of thinking and that person's self-creation of unhappiness. For example, you may find among your own relatives, close relatives, where what you think is a minor problem, they think is a major problem and carry it on their head for weeks on end. And you say, "Arey, this is not a big problem, just do it like this and leave it." No, aisa ho gaya, iske wajah se wo ho gaya, that also happened, it is so thing, what if this goes wrong, what if that goes wrong? That is their natural tendency. The evolution of that soul is only till then. You think, this is so stupid, why are you wrapping yourself up around this problem? This is done, you leave it, it's over. But that soul hasn't come there yet. It takes your prodding and that suffering for that soul to come to the next level. So one should not stop the prodding. One should not say, I am detached, I have no responsibility. If it is my brother, if it is my sister, if it is my mother, if it is my father, there is a karmic linkage. And as a karmic linkage, my responsibility is also to show them what I see. But on the other hand, we can't push them also to the point of discomfort. It is a delicate balance. And we have to work gradually. It will happen. Eventually it will happen. I am very optimistic that given, relatively speaking, the force of the mother that is working, and we are also where we were compared to 5 years ago, she has brought us a few steps ahead. And we have a few more steps ahead. We can keep going there. That is a very valid point. In fact, satsang is very necessary. In some ways, we only think of karma in a negative way, that we have done something wrong, therefore something is pulling us back. There is also a positive entanglement that can be created through karma, where with souls of higher levels of consciousness, even by thinking with them, we are establishing a linkage. And of course, if we have an opportunity to interact with somebody, who is advanced with this. There are 4 instruments of us that Sri Aurobindo points out here, and this will keep repeating almost for the entire section of Yoga of Self-Perfection. Each of them he takes up and describes in more detail. He is just introducing them here now. He says, Supermind, mind, life and body are the four instruments which the spirit uses for its manifestation in the workings of the nature. And now, in the subsequent sections, he describes supermind, contrasts it with a little bit of the mind, life and body, and later on there is an entire chapter dedicated to perfection of these instruments. When we talk about supermind, I will also refer you back to the Panchakosha that is referred in Taittiriya Upanishad, Annamaya Purusha, Pranamaya Purusha, Manomaya Purusha, Vijnanamaya Purusha, Anandamaya Purusha. And above Ananda is Sat and Chit. So when you talk about 7 worlds, you are talking of physical, vital, mental, supramental, and then Ananda and Chit and Sat. So these are the 7 layers. In the traditional terminology, this is Vijnanamaya Kosha. Supermind is a Vijnanamaya Kosha. Supermind is spiritual consciousness acting as a self-luminous knowledge. Supermind is the spiritual consciousness acting as self-luminous. It knows the truth by itself. It doesn't need an additional light to see the truth. Mind needs additional light to perceive the truth. Supramental truth is self-evident. Self-luminous knowledge, will, sense, aesthesis, energy, self-creative and unveiling power of its own delight and being. Mind is the action of the same powers but limited and only very indirectly and partially illumined. Supermind lives in unity, though it plays with diversity. Supermind is incapable of real ignorance. Mind, on the other hand, lives in the separative action of diversity, works characteristically as a power of ignorance. It does forget itself in a complete inconscience or nescience. It can never have by itself a complete knowledge. So, when he talks about mind, Sri Aurobindo refers to our normal state of the mind at which we are operating as the mind of ignorance. It can work only by cutting the higher truth into smaller bits, and therefore it loses the connectivity between them. My mind, for example, understands that we are all one soul, but it understands it at a conceptual level where it doesn't allow for it to be an experiential truth. It is only a mental truth, barricaded by ignorance. Similarly, it can never have complete knowledge, and it is a power of ignorance. Now, supermind lends itself to the action of the inferior instruments. It is always there, indeed, at the core as a secret support of their operations. What he is pointing out here is he has taken up the 4 instruments, supermind, mind, life and body, and he says what is supermind and mind. He has given a contrast, and then he also points out that in the mind and the life and the body, supermind is already there. It is always there as at the core, as a support, secret support of their operations. We keep, at points of time, we may have an approach where we say, okay, I am here up to the mind, I can meditate here, supermind has to come from there. Not necessary. Supermind is already manifesting in the complex, the body, mind and emotions complex as the supporting truth. We just have to let go of the outer covering and it will reveal itself. It is there supporting us today. Now Sri Aurobindo refers to the life and body. He talked about supermind and mind, and he says life. Life is an energy of spirit subordinated to the action of body and mind and acts as a link between them. What we call vitality is, for the purposes of our normal human existence, power of conscious being emerging in matter, liberating from it, and in it mind and higher powers, and supporting their limited action in the physical life. Essentially, the body, life and mind are tripartite and intertwined. Each is supporting the other in a meaningful way. But there is a certain principle of contraction that happens. All the power of the prana cannot be expressed in the matter. Matter, by its power of ignorance, curtails the expression of prana. All the power of the mind cannot be fully expressed in the life. Life, by its rigidity, brings in a certain diminution. Similarly, supermind cannot express itself fully in the present mind, life and body. It is also diminished in its expression. So 4 instruments we are covering today: body, prana and mind and supermind. He is the higher consciousness. Each of us has this higher consciousness. As a principle, it is already supporting us, but it is subjected to the limitations of our present consciousness. Now, each higher level, when it comes to the lower level, gets diminished and contracted. Matter or body itself is a limiting form of substance of spirit in which life, mind and spirit are involved, self-hidden, self-forgetful by absorption in their own externalizing action, but bound to emerge from it by a self-compelling evolution. This is the secret of how things are evolving. Each higher principle is there in the lower manifestation. It is because of that that the lower manifestation is coming to a higher realization. There is an entire school of thought which talks about Maya, ignorance, suffering, power of God. What they do is they bifurcate the world into good and bad. This is not a question of good and bad, right and wrong. This is a question of darkness which has a seed of light in it, and that light is gradually growing. So this darkness is not bad. It is not your evil doing. It is not your negative karma. It is just that the soul has to evolve, and as you make that possibility to realize, automatically darkness will go. You don't have to find your papa and destroy it. पाप को पकड़ के उसके पीछे दौड़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. Spontaneously it will happen. Man himself has, besides this gross material body, an essential vital sheath, a mental body, and a body of bliss and gnosis. This is the Vijnanamaya Kosha we talked about. This is the nature of spirit and its instruments. Okay, so we have covered one section of this chapter, where what Aurobindo has pointed out here in the psychology of self-perfection is, first he laid out what are the 4 important instruments if you want to pursue the yoga of self-perfection: body, emotions and mind, and higher consciousness called supermind. Now he moves on to the second phase, second section of this chapter, where he talks about how do you uplift these instruments. We all know we have a problem. Body mein tamas hai, anger hai, emotions mein, all of these. Now how do you uplift all of these instruments? Now we are moving into the second phase of this chapter, and he comes back to one of the favorite topics in integral yoga. We keep covering it again and again. So how to uplift the instruments out of their established grooves? We have to perceive that the spirit has based all its workings upon the twin aspects of the being, soul and nature, Purusha and Prakriti. Back to our favorite Purusha and Prakriti. See, as our soul evolves birth after birth, birth after birth, last time we talked about the 600-pound gorilla, which is our nature. The 600-pound gorilla knows what it wants, and it likes something, it hates something. This is how we are born. And because our mind is open to higher light, we say this is ethical, this is moral, this is spiritual, I want to do this. But the gorilla says, I don't like it, I don't want to do it. So we fight with our nature. And sometimes we suppress it and we sit on it. But after some time, the gorilla gets angry and it throws us away. We can control anger. We can try to control it again and again and again. Somebody is provoking you once, twice, thrice. You control it 3 times. But the 4th time, you take all of it and give it with interest to that fellow. That day, he may have only done this much wrong. But you will give him this much. Because the last is all fine. This is our human nature. So what we talked about is, slowly this gorilla has to be given taste of these spiritual teachings. You have to slowly change it. The gorilla changes at the pace of geology. How do continents drift? Millions of years. It doesn't happen overnight. Geological changes take millennia. The gorilla changes taste in millennia. We have to keep on working persistently. We don't have a millennia. We only have 60-70 years to live. So what do we have to do? Okay, gorilla, I will give you ice cream in the evening, but in the morning you sit with me for meditation. So slowly you cultivate. Okay, 10 minutes is enough, gorilla. I know you can't sit for more than 10 minutes. Slowly start with 10 minutes, then 15 minutes, then 20 minutes. And we have identified 5-6 things which are helpful for spirituality. What are they? 1, try to do a little bit of physical exercise, asanas or gym, whatever. Ensure that the physical is supple and it is energetic, the energy is flowing properly. Try to cultivate some basic pranayam, some basic thing, because it really helps us conserve our energies, and if we are conscious of our breath, we can control our emotions very, very easily. You get angry, put your hand on your stomach and breathe with your stomach for 5 minutes. Anger will automatically go. Your reaction will subside immediately. So, this breathing to me is like that quick fix. Pehle ye dal do, stop the problem. It will not help you in the larger evolution, but first, controlling nature, it will help. Meditation. If you are inclined, do a little bit of puja. If you are somebody who comes from a place where jap kar payenge, to jap karo. Satsang karo, swadhyay karo. These are 5-6 basic things. Make sure you read every day 2-3 pages. स्वाध्याय मतलब अपने आप बैठ के आप पढ़ो थोड़ा. कोई भी स्क्रिप्चर लेके, गीता, उपनिषद, श्री माँ के रचन, श्री अरविंद के रचन, स्पिरिचुअल गुरुज के रचन, थोड़ा पढ़ो रोज. So this way you are giving the taste to the gorilla. Now what happens is, because of our evolution over life after life, we have these tendencies of the gorillas. It is called vasana in some of the traditional literature. These are all vasanas. Vasanas means previous impressions in our mind. And those have to be gradually changed, and they can be changed by taking up and regularly doing these activities. And now listen to the sentence that Sri Aurobindo talks about. He says, how to uplift the instruments out of their established grooves. Purane jo tendencies se kaise badalna hai. Now he is saying, we have to perceive that the spirit is based on 2 workings, Purusha and Prakriti, soul and nature. We have to treat them as different and diverse in power. Purusha or soul is the spirit, cognizant of its working, of the workings of its nature, supporting them by its being, enjoying or rejecting the enjoyment of them in its delight of being. Prakriti or nature is the power of the spirit, and she too is working, formulating name and form of the being. This is the first identification of Prakriti. Nama Rupa. Then, developing action of consciousness and knowledge, throwing itself up in will and impulsion, force and energy, fulfilling itself in enjoyment. Prakriti is nature. We are all familiar with our Prakriti. We are our nature, our tendency, our temperament. We all know. Very predictable. If I do this, if somebody does this, I will do this. This is the program we are all working under. Thoda, we can, depending on whether we meditated that day or not, we can change a little bit. But otherwise, we all know the temperament. This is what is called Prakriti. So what is Purusha? The entire formulation of Indian spiritual thought is that in each person there are 2 elements. One element which is continuously in operation, but there is a higher element which can observe itself in operation. For example, when we sit for meditation, we can observe our thoughts. Yes, we have all observed our thoughts. Who is that observer? I am speaking, but I can step back and see myself speaking. Who is that? I am listening. While you are listening to me, you can observe yourself listening to me. Who is that observer? This is our own awareness. That awareness is called Purusha. It is the ability to observe oneself. And this is a very, very important element of our own nature. And people who practice this regularly and who have evolved, they say that, okay, I am talking, but I am also observing myself talking. Is there somebody who can observe the person who is observing me talking? One more layer. 3, 4, 5 layers one can go back. That is what they say. People who practice it regularly, they say, not only can I observe myself, I can observe the person observing myself. We have to practice. Once we are evolving in that direction, then what happens is spontaneous reactions stop. Understand? This is the key to the whole magic. That observer. वही जब आप पुरुष तत्व में आ जाते हैं तो रिएक्शन को आप देख पाते हैं और रोक भी पाते हैं. पहला देखना चाहिए और वो थोड़ा प्रैक्टिस से आगे. इसको हम साक्षी पुरुष कहते हैं, जो भगवद गीता में बताते हैं साक्षी पुरुष. हाँ, साक्षी दृष्टा, विटनेस कॉन्शियसनेस. तो अपने आप को आप रिएक्शंस को देख पाएंगे. मैं किस तरह से बोल रहा हूँ, मैं किस ढंग से बात कर रहा हूँ, मेरी एनर्जी आज कैसी है, मेरे थॉट्स आज कैसे हैं. We all know when we are hungry, we get more tendency to be angry. Right? But if you are in a witness consciousness, you know that I am hungry, therefore I am getting angry, I will not get angry. The first thing is becoming aware through observation. First step. Second step is once you have the ability to observe, you can say, I am not going to involve. I am observing this action, but I will not involve in that action. I will detach. After detachment comes mastery, where I can say, I know this is happening, but मैं इसको रोक रहा हूँ. I don't want it to happen. Observation, detachment, control, and then mastery. Control का practice करोगे धीरे धीरे, then mastery आता. But it is a very important spiritual step forward. Observe, detach, control, master. धीरे धीरे जब आप कंट्रोल करना शुरू करोगे और मास्टरी करना शुरू करोगे, what happens? Once you get angry, you have learned to observe. Second time you have got angry, you have learned to observe. After the 10th time, you are able to control the anger also. No, it is not worth getting so angry. Let me divert my mind for some time. And after you do that 10 times, you know what happens? The nature itself starts changing. It stops getting angry. See, first, nature carries you. Anger, you beat somebody. Second time, because you have read spirituality, you say, no, it is bad to beat, so I will hold my hand. Physical control. कभी कभी बहुत मजा आता है जब आप देखना शुरू करेंगे, क्योंकि you are able to see other people react and you are able to observe. Right. And this is the key to transforming the nature. In the whole path of self-perfection, one has to work towards transforming nature. This is how we work. I'll read a little bit more. The entire section now is about Purusha and Prakriti only. Now Sri Aurobindo describes, if we look at nature, on her most external side, where she seems the opposite of Purusha, an inert, mechanical, self-driven operation, and it is inconscient. One of the important things that to note is we have to learn to observe the patterns of our behavior. This is the first step towards understanding Prakriti. What are my normal patterns? When is my energy high? When is my energy low? When do I react positively? When do I react negatively? What kind of food suits me? What kind of food reacts with me? Who are the people that suit me? Who are the people that I react negatively to? First is observing and understanding our nature. When I get up in the morning, am I somebody who prefers silence and calm? Or am I the first thing to open WhatsApp groups and start catching up? What kind of restlessness is built into me? Observe that restlessness. Restlessness is Prakriti. Reaction is Prakriti. It almost seems opposite of Purusha. It is inert, it is mechanical, and it is repetitive. When you have an argument with a friend and come back, what does your mind do? उसने ऐसा कहा, मैंने ऐसा कहा, मुझे ऐसा करना चाहिए था, मुझे ये बोलना चाहिए था. That is all Prakriti in action. If we look at her on the other internal side, where she moves nearer to unity with the Purusha, she is Maya, will of being and becoming, or of cessation from being and becoming. Now he is referring to the more refined side of Prakriti as you go deeper and deeper. See, and there are phrases that Sri Aurobindo uses which actually belong to the domain of philosophy as a field. Each field has its own vocabulary. If you go to a doctor, he has his own vocabulary. If you go to an engineer, he has his own vocabulary. If you go to a philosopher, there is its own vocabulary that has been happening for centuries. One of the themes of that philosophy is being and becoming. Going way back to Greek philosophers, there was a huge debate even at that time. Is the world being or becoming? What is being or becoming? Being is a stationary object. Is the world stationary or is the world continuously changing, becoming? On one hand, when you see the nature around you, every 3 months the weather changes. The water keeps flowing, nothing is static. Trees grow up and fall down, nothing is static. So one can say the entire universe is only dynamic. There is nothing static about it. But somebody can argue that the earth itself is static. And it is on that foundation of static that the dynamic is moving. The dynamic is like a drama, the earth is like a stage. So the truth actually is the earth, which is the being. It is not the becoming. The becoming is an illusion, the truth is the being. So this is where they use the word being and becoming. So Sri Aurobindo says, Prakriti at one level can also be considered as the Maya, the being and becoming, or somebody who steps back from the being and becoming also. It's a very more higher frame of reference. And involution, evolution, existing, non-existing, self-concealment of the spirit, self-discovery of the spirit. All this can be viewed as the higher level of nature. But both are the sides of one and the same thing. Shakti, power of being of the spirit, which operates as the spirit's power of knowledge, spirit's power of will, spirit's power of process and action. What Sri Aurobindo is saying is, being and becoming are not separate. They are two aspects of the same truth. And the becoming that we see is nothing but manifestation of the being. It is like the sun and the sun rays. There is no sun ray without the sun. They are one and the same thing. But one can say, this is a ray of light, I can touch a ray of light, I cannot touch the sun. But the ray of light is dependent on the sun. The sun is the being, the ray of light is the becoming. And in this case, he defines three aspects of the becoming. Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti and Kriya Shakti. Jnana Shakti, the power of knowledge. Ichha Shakti, the power of will. And Kriya Shakti, the power of action and manifestation. In fact, even in our traditional scriptures, when you read Lalita Sahasranama, you have a name that comes Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti Swarupini. So you are the truth, you are the essence of all the capacities of manifestation. By this power, the spirit creates all things in itself, hides and discovers all itself in the form and behind the veil of its manifestation. Look at this sentence. By this power, the dynamic power, the spirit creates all things in itself. It doesn't say from itself. What is the difference? By this power of creation, the spirit creates all things in itself. Not from itself. In the sense, the minute I say I have created this from myself, then I am putting it outside somewhere else. So here, even the Jagat is the spirit. Where is it keeping it? It is keeping it inside itself only. Because if I say I have taken it from myself, I am giving it to somebody. But there is no somebody here. It is creating, it is like this. Urna Nabhinyaya, again a philosophical example from Vedanta. The world is the creation created by the Creator from Himself in Himself. What is the closest example? See, even in the Maya, even in the power of ignorance, depending on which school of thought you read, that school of thought has a different definition of Maya. In the traditional school of Vedanta by Adi Shankaracharya, Maya is considered as a delusion which is moving you away from the truth. So if you go by the philosophy of Aurobindo, he says that Maya is essentially a temporary covering which is concealing the truth from you. As your consciousness grows, the Maya recedes. So it is not, Maya is not somebody catching hold of our hand and dragging us. It is our own inability to raise to that level of consciousness where we are able to see the truth. Therefore we are in ignorance, and that ignorance is Maya. Progressively, as we raise our consciousness, Maya will recede. It is a spontaneous happening. It is like saying that once I light a candle, the darkness has receded. There is no darkness that is coming and catching hold of me. The absence of light is the darkness. The minute my consciousness is growing, the darkness automatically goes away. Now, there is an example in philosophy that talks about the Brahman. Again, a Vedantic philosophy. Brahman. What is Brahman? They say Brahman, again in philosophy we talk about these three elements: nature, Brahman and Jiva. Jiva, Paramatma, and all of these three. They say that this world is a creation from Brahman. How is it a creation? Has he taken it from him and put it out? No. It is like a spider weaving its web. What is the material with which the spider weaves its web?
Saliva.
Its own saliva. So the world is nothing but Brahman. Where does it come from? From Brahman. What is the world? It is the web. What is it made of? Brahman again. So the Brahman is everywhere. It is what we see, it is where we came from, and it is where we are going. All of that is Brahman. So that is why this sentence, when we read it, we should observe what Sri Aurobindo is saying in terms of, by this process, the spirit creates all things in itself, hides and discovers all itself in the form and behind the veil of its manifestation. So the manifestation is itself, but there is a veiling because of our ignorance. In fact, even the presence of Maya and the presence of ignorance also is considered to be a game played by the Ishvara. Tirodhana Karishwari says Sarita Sahasranama. And in Shiva's functions, if you go into Saiva Siddhanta, there also they say he is the creator, sustainer, destroyer, Tirodhanakara, the one who engulfs us in ignorance and the one who grants us liberation. All are his own doings. So this is Prakriti. Purusha is able, by this power of its nature, to take whatever poise it may will, what it believes it can be, and has full faith in becoming, that it changes to nature, evolves or discovers. So essentially, the Purusha consciousness, the witness consciousness, and this is not only a theoretical exercise. Please remember this. We have to practice this witness consciousness. We have to ensure that we are able to practice it. We are able to do it. Okay? And this is a meditation in itself, where one can sit down in meditation, observe one's thoughts, try to ensure that one is able to remain in that state of consciousness. Initially in meditation, later outside of meditation also. The Purusha can take whatever poise it may will. It is the eternal soul and spirit in its own power of self-experience, superior to and governing its manifestation. It is the universal soul and spirit developed in the power of its becoming, infinite in the finite. This witness consciousness is what Sri Aurobindo is referring to, the infinite element in us. Once we get there, we are getting closer to our non-temporal existence. All things it can be at once. Eternal spirit universalized in cosmos, individualized in its beings. It can too found the consciousness rejecting, governing or responding to the action of nature in any one of them. It can be universalized in its realization. What is the Upanishad Mahavakya for that? Realization of the individual in the universal, Aham Brahmasmi. Right? Or the spirit, the Purusha, can also be individual in its manifestation, and it can also control the manifestation of the Prakriti. It is not irrevocably limited by any particular self-formulation in time, but can break through and beyond it, break it up or develop it, select, reject, new create, reveal out of itself a greater self-formulation. Essentially, he is saying that this Purusha witness consciousness that we start by observing the thoughts, it has gradations and gradations and gradations to such an extent that you can rise to the highest realizations of spiritual life. But the first step is observing one's thoughts. And from there one can grow, and goes on to say, this power of the soul over its nature is of the utmost importance in the yoga of self-perfection. If it did not exist, we could never get, by conscious endeavor and aspiration, out of the fixed groove of our present imperfect human nature. So he says this is the key that unlocks the path of yoga for us. Otherwise we would always be subject to nature, and yoga is exceeding one's nature. How do you do that? The transformation of physical, vital and mental. The first key is Purusha and Prakriti. Understand the Purusha nature, step back and keep practicing stepping back. And now look to what extent it can grow. It says, as it rises higher in the scale, it awakens to a sense of something in itself which can command the nature. Now we are getting command of the nature. We can say, yeah, I know you always tend to get angry. Yeah, I know you get jealous, but please move aside. And you shift that thought, you erase that thought, clean the blackboard. And again life goes on. If we are able to catch it at that moment when it enters our consciousness, any non-movement, if we are able to catch it at that moment, pick it up like that and put it out, life can really go on. It is only our ability to observe it when it is just bubbling. If you observe bubbles in an aquarium, the bubble is very small when it comes. It is 100 times its size by the time it comes to the top. Now observe bubbles. They start at this size and then they become bigger by the time they come to the surface. That is what happens in our human nature. In our Prakriti, we have to observe the wrong movement when it is just starting. Catch it then and there with the Purusha consciousness. Move it out. In fact, somewhere Mother or Sri Aurobindo talks about a black dot that is picked up as though by a forceps and moved out and dropped. No? You've read that, no? Just that little thing, pick it up. We just have to be very vigilant of our thoughts. We cannot give ourselves the license that a normal man gives. When complete mastery is gained, so we talked about Purusha and Prakriti, negative movements that we don't want, first observe, then tell yourself, these are not my movements, these are coming from outside, these are things that I can remove. Okay. One of the other things that did not come in this flow here is also, we talked about how the individual is connected to the universal. Sometimes these movements enter into us from the universe. We don't have to feel bad. This is a universal ignorance also that is there inside of us. So they come. So first observe, detach, then control, and then mastery. When the mastery is gained, then the process by its self-effective rapidity may seem a miracle to the intelligence. The problem which was a 600-pound gorilla is now slowly becoming a manageable monkey. It is coming, but you are able to tame it. You are able to say, hey, don't do that. And the monkey is scared, it will listen to you. And gradually you can, get rid of these movements. For the divine is our highest self and self of all nature, the eternal and the universal Purusha. Purusha may establish himself in any plane of the being. The soul may dwell in the principle of infinite unity and self-existence. So again, remember, every chapter you notice, Sri Aurobindo talks about the individual and at the end of it moves it to the collective and the universal. He doesn't stop. Every step he brings it back to the universal movement. So he says, once you go to that level of consciousness at the Purusha, the soul may dwell in the principle of infinite unity and self-existence. This is Sat. It may dwell in the principle of infinite conscious energy, tapas, and aware of it unrolling out of self-existence the works of knowledge, will, dynamic soul action, etc. Chit. It may dwell in the principle of infinite self-existent delight and be aware of the divine Ananda. So this small Sakshi Purush, which started as observation of our thoughts, is the key for us to realizing ourselves as Sat Chit Ananda, the highest state of consciousness according to Sanatana Dharma. In these three poises, the consciousness of unity dominates. The soul lives in its awareness of eternity and universality. And whatever diversity is there is not separative but multitudinous aspect of oneness. So, not only do we rise to that level of Satchidananda, as we get glimpses of that Satchidananda consciousness, we find ourselves with the universal realization of unity with everything and everyone around us. It is a very beautiful place to be. Very beautiful place to be. It may dwell too in the principle of supermind, in a luminous, self-determining knowledge, will and action. The lower being begins. Now he's talking about the reverse journey. We talked about Satchidananda and the highest state of consciousness. The lower being begins where a veil falls between the soul and nature, between the spirit in supermind and the spirit in mind, life and body. Mind gets to an independent idea of its own action when it forgets to refer back to the light from which it deviates. So mind also at its essence has the ability to uncover supramental, but it forgets to refer back to the light. Forgets to refer back to the light, the source from which it came. The native tendency of the material being leads towards an absorption of the soul's energy in the act of formation and material movement and a consequent self-oblivion of the conscious being. The material universe begins from an apparent inconscience. We talked about the being and becoming. The being is there and Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti are what create. You want to see something, that is the will, Ichha Shakti. You have the Jnana of how to create it, that is Jnana Shakti, and you actually create it, that is Kriya Shakti. It is in this process of Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti, we have forgotten the being from where we started. That is where the veil has fallen. It is like a child who holds the mother's hand and goes to the playground and leaves the mother's hand and gets involved in the playing and forgets the mother. In a way, we are that child. The universal Purusha dwells in all these planes in a certain simultaneity and builds upon each of these principles a world or a series of worlds with its beings who live in the nature of that principle. Now he talked about this world and now he is hinting at gradations of worlds where depending on the level of consciousness of the individual, the person may inhabit that world. There is a world or a series of worlds. And as we dwell more and more at that level of consciousness, we belong to that world. there is a macrocosm and a microcosm. Those worlds are also reflected in our own being. It is not that these are physiological entities. 30,000 feet तक ये stratosphere है, उसके बाद वो है. No, it is not like that. The dimensions don't correspond to the 3-4 dimensions that we are aware of. Man has all these planes in his own being. By developing the power of yoga, he can become aware of these concealed worlds. He can open up and increase the action of these higher planes in himself. As we do sadhana, the consciousness of these higher planes starts descending into us and starts the work of taking us purified more and more to that level of consciousness. First the descent, then the ascent. His most important capacity is that of developing the higher power, the higher principles in himself. A greater power of life, a purer light of the mind, the illumination of the supermind, the infinite being, consciousness and delight of the spirit. By an ascending movement, he can develop his human imperfection towards that greater perfection. Nature power in him has to become more and more completely a conscious act of the soul, a conscious expression of the will and knowledge of the spirit. The Prakriti has to reveal itself as the Shakti of the Purusha. Essentially, this is the Purushartha for which we are striving, where instead of working in our day-to-day life, forgetting our eternal truth, remembering the eternal truth and working in the day-to-day world. Because one of the important differences of traditional paths of yoga and Sri Aurobindo's yoga is also that the ultimate Purushartha of the traditional paths of yoga is moksha, where you want liberation and moving away from this world. But one of the most important fundamental principles of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga is you don't turn away from the world, you receive the higher consciousness and then you work to manifest the divine consciousness in this world. That is something that one has to keep in mind. So, here we have covered the chapter on Purusha and Prakriti in the yoga of self-perfection. We have to remember to practice it initially during meditations and later during the day-to-day interactions that we have. And depending on how the meditation goes, it is a very beautiful experience also. Sometimes, you feel the voice also is not yours. It feels like this is a separate box from which the voice is coming and your consciousness is observing it. Kisi aur ki awaaz, just as when I would listen to you speak, I would listen to this body speak, provided I am able to remain in that state of consciousness. But lifting this hand also, it feels when you are deep in that awareness, it is like somebody, really an effort has to be made to lift it because that identification is not there. But those are gradually higher levels of awareness which we have to do. And once we are able to retain at one level, then we can try to go to the observer who is observing the Prakriti. That people have done it. People like you and me have done it. It is not an invention. It is something that one can do. Lekin Sakshi Purusha is very important. And the next chapter deals with perfection of the mental being. In the traditional philosophy, we refer to Manas, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankara. When they talked about mind, they did not use one word. They used 4 words. Manas, Buddhi, Chitta and Ahankara. So Sri Aurobindo takes up each of these. Manas, Buddhi and Chitta. He doesn't take up Ahankara. Ahankara is the ego sense. Perhaps he deals with it separately. And then he analyzes each of them as to how they apply, what they mean inside of us. Because mind is a very subtle and refined entity. Each function he has given a different name. And then he talks about perfection of each of those functions. It is a fairly theoretical chapter at one level. One has to make an effort to ensure that one follows it without withdrawing into Sachidananda. So let us all sit for a few minutes. The principle of the chapter is observing our thoughts. Let us go and acquire that Purusha status of consciousness for a few minutes.